If you're like us, you're probably tired of flipping through outdated and expensive regulation books and struggling to understand the rule or guidance you're after. e-regs is the first web and mobile app version of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, helping fleets of all types and sizes better access and understand their regulatory obligations. e-regs is always up to date and allows fleet safety professionals to not only read the rules, but also dig into FMCSA guidance and learn more about complex regulatory topics from industry experts. Highlight, bookmark, and take detailed notes right from the app and access them on any of your devices. And easily share a digital version of the regulations with your drivers so that they too can better understand the rules. e-regs was developed by safety professionals for safety professionals. Try it out for free at eregs.app. All right, hey everyone, welcome to episode 60 of Trucksafe Live, show where we and our guests tackle the hot button issues impacting highway transportation. I'm Brandon with Trucksafe and Childress Law, both of which are dedicated to helping motor carriers develop and maintain cutting-edge safety programs. Got Rob Carpenter with me today. Rob, what's going on?
Not a whole lot. How's it going?
It's warming up here in Indianapolis. How about over there in Virginia?
It is. It's like 55 here, so it's good.
You still got some snow on the ground?
We've got some ice. I mean, because we had that snow, then it was supposed to be like snow, and then it turned to rain, then it turned to ice, and then we had an ice rink in the entire yard. So that's taken some time.
Yeah, we had like 6 inches of snow on the ground up until yesterday, and it's starting to melt finally. So that'll be nice.
Yeah, I had pipes freeze, so that was the first time for that, which was an event. So.
That's no good. Did they burst or no?
No, they didn't. It's just problematic when you don't have any water.
Well, that's good. Yeah, no, that's not good. But okay, people didn't come here to hear us talk about plumbing. Appreciate y'all joining us here. If you're here with us live, say hey in the comments so we know who's around. And obviously, big show today talking about chameleon carriers. This is another topic that's been all over the news of late, including a bunch of articles that Rob has written on the topic. So I'm excited to talk to him about it. An increasing issue in our industry, as if we don't have enough issues to deal with. This is yet another one. And so wanted to get to the bottom of it. And so excited to welcome back on here in a few minutes, Jack Van Steenburg, former chief safety officer from FMCSA, to help us walk through it. What is contributing to the problem? What exactly are chameleon carriers, first of all? I think a lot of folks just don't even understand what they are. So we'll kind of break that down, get into the nuts and bolts of it, where things are going wrong and that type of stuff. Before we get there, though, a few things to talk about. First of all, Trucksafe Wise. If you're not a member of the Trucksafe Network, I'd encourage you to join it over at trucksafenetwork.com or scan that QR code there on the screen. This is the app that we've built for safety professionals to gather together, learn from one another, ask questions, and also access all of our DOT-related content. So hope to see you over there. Secondly, we just opened up today, in fact, registration for our next Trucksafe Fleet Compliance Boot Camp. This one will be September 16th through the 18th in Indianapolis. We're super excited about this. Again, you can find the details over at trucksafebootcamp.com. All of the Trucksafe team will be there. Jack will be there. And we've just got a great agenda planned for this year's event. If you're not familiar with the boot camp, this will be our 5th annual boot camp. It's our 2.5 day in this case, in-person conference where we spend the entire time talking about nothing but DOT compliance with a group of fleet safety professionals, insurance folks, risk advisors, and that group, and we just really dig into the details of DOT compliance and helping fleets to develop cutting-edge safety programs. So looking forward to that. Rob, you looking forward to that again?
Yeah, it's usually a pretty good time. See
He
if we can get
sounds
some more
super
drivers
excited
there
about
this
it.
year. I
More
am, you know
drivers.
me.
More
Yeah,
drivers.
we had the one driver last year. That was unique.
I think we
I
had a
think there was
couple
perspective
drivers.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
didn't have that historically.
Yeah, this year, so it's normally a 2-day conference, but this year we're adding a third half day event that will be a simulated deposition of a fleet safety director so that folks in attendance can observe what a real life deposition looks like of a safety director following a highway accident or in the context of highway accident litigation, because obviously that's a big deal. And if you're a fleet and you end up in one of those, and so you don't ever want to be trying to plan for that right on the fly. So we found it's good to give fleets a glimpse into what that process entails, some of the traps that are involved in it. So we think that's going to be a big hit with not only attendees, but we're also opening up that half day session just to the general public if folks just want to show up for that. Again, this will all be in Indianapolis in September at the Crown Plaza Union Station Hotel, downtown Indianapolis. Great venue. Should be fun. So again, check out the details. Spots will fill up quick, so be sure to register if you're interested in joining us. We usually have around 100 or so in attendance. Trucksafebootcamp.com is where you'll find the details. All right, enough about us. A couple things going on in the industry before we start digging into chameleon carriers. First up, I wanted to mention Rob's just been knocking out the articles recently. I don't know how you have time to put all these articles together, Rob, but some of the recent ones he posted that I wanted to just highlight. This one was, I know, a big undertaking for you, but it has to do with insurers, commercial auto liability insurers, and how they are getting involved in some of these or getting wrapped up in some of these discussions about the crashes that we're seeing with commercial motor vehicles. So give us the quick and dirty here, rundown of the story.
Yeah, the quick and dirty is, well, one of the things that I've looked at. I mean, you, me, everybody else in our group, we go to a lot of different carriers, and there's a lot of times that I started to see carriers that are smaller and they're still getting into the market, but almost always they're non-underwritten coverage. So I started to look at fleet size and then history, performance, and then what I started to notice was large legacy fleets that have been in business for years. They've got larger fleets. They're generally in captive groups, whether sole member or group captive. And then on the bottom end of that spectrum, where you see more crashes, more violations, worse history, and of ultimately more less underwritten coverage, is that bad side of the spectrum. So the methodology we basically said is generally this should be a barrier to entry. And somewhere we got to a point where we started just giving out insurance, instant quote, without underwriting the coverage or to review what you're self-attesting to when you get coverage. And that's allowed a lot of bad actors to get into the market. So it's becoming a bigger thing, actually. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I think that barriers to entry issue is something, if I had to guess, that FMCSA is going to have to tackle here in the near term. I know they've hinted at it in the past with things like knowledge exams for folks that are wanting to establish a new trucking company. That never ended up going anywhere. We've obviously got the new entrant safety audit process now. I don't know how effective that is, if at all, given our experience with it, but nevertheless, that's what we've got. Beyond that, free to get a DOT number, only $300 if you want some operating authority to go with it. And then, as you say, insurance was historically the big hang up and the big barrier to entry. Can you source insurance at a cost that is affordable to you? And as you pointed out in the article, everybody should go over there to FreightWaves and read it. Maybe not so much of a barrier to entry anymore, given what the data is showing. So yeah, big issue for sure. All right. So great job with that article. One other thing I saw come through this past week, this wasn't one of your articles, but I thought this was interesting nonetheless. You probably saw it. A group has filed a petition for an exemption with FMCSA to the ELD requirement. This is just an article on Overdrive. It says the Federation of Professional Truckers petitioned the FMCSA for an exemption from the electronic logging device requirements. Let's see here. They say the group is requesting an exemption from the ELD requirement to allow cover drivers to record their records of duty status manually with a paper logbook rather than with an ELD. They argue that paper logs remain enforceable and are understood by enforcement officers nationwide, and that small carriers face disproportionate financial burdens from the ELD requirement. Thoughts on this? I mean, I haven't read the exemption request itself, but I don't know. Some of these issues that are just pointed out in the article seemed like they were raised and addressed through the rulemaking through the painful rulemaking process for the ELD mandate itself. So I don't know what's new here.
No, I'm kind of torn on this one, obviously, because of the shirt that I have on. But then there's the second piece of it is from somebody that drove trucks there long before ELDs even was discussed. I mean, obviously ELDs have their issues, and fatalities and crashes haven't gone down; they've gone up since they came into existence. But just knowing, like, I used to run seafood, and I was probably one of the most illegal seafood haulers, and that's just the name of that business. And the funny thing about that was you can cite malfunctions and other issues with the ELD, which in some cases they're accurate, but you still have issues with people that do grid logs. Yeah. So I think you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, but there's obviously benefits to both. But
yeah,
are they going to get their exemption?
Yeah, call me cynical, but I don't see any way that this moves forward, especially all of the headache that went into getting the ELD rule passed. It was caught up in litigation for years. FMCSA got it through that. I just don't see any world where we come off of that. But regardless, that is currently pending. If anybody has anything to say about it, they can go file their public comments in the docket for that. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting. So, all right. I think that's all I had. Anything else that we missed there, Rob, that you think we need to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we could go on all day on news, though.
All right. Well, in recent weeks, the issue of chameleon carriers has moved from an industry talking point to a national headline. A tragic crash in Indiana that killed 4 members of an Amish community has drawn intense scrutiny, not just on the drivers involved, but on the driver involved, but on the carrier and the broader network of affiliated companies now under federal investigation. Today, we're going to take a closer look at how chameleon carriers actually work, what they are, why they remain so difficult to stop, and what cases like this reveal about gaps in enforcement and oversight. To do so, we're excited to be joined once again by Mr. Jack Van Steenburg, former FMCSA Chief Safety Officer and Principal of CMV Safety Experts. To break that down, Jack, welcome back.
Thanks for inviting me, Brandon, and Rob, good seeing you again.
Good seeing you.
It's always great to get your perspective on these tough issues, Jack. Obviously, we would like to not have to be talking about fraud like this and these issues that end up leading to the types of accidents that we're seeing, but it's the reality of things, and so here we are having to deal with it. And obviously, these are complex issues that the FMCSA has to figure out ways to get a hold of it. So appreciate your insight as always. I think where we should start with this, unless you guys have a better thought, is what exactly is a chameleon carrier? Because like I said at the start of the show, what I found is there seem to be a lot of accusations being thrown around from what I can tell on social media about affiliations between carriers or among carriers and somehow tying that alone, those affiliations alone, to being chameleon carriers. So let's clear up some of the mess here and first define what we're talking about when we are talking about chameleon carriers. Jack, you want to give that a go?
Yeah, and I'm going back to the FMCSA days, and there is a difference between chameleon and reincarnation. So I'm just going to read you one sentence. It's a definition that chameleon activity is an action by an existing registered enterprise for use of multiple U.S. DOT numbers, operating in partnerships to hide, evade safety performance problems or avoid sanctions. Whereas a reincarnation is an action by an enterprise new applicant to obtain a new U.S. DOT number or operating authority for existing number using a new identity to hide, evade safety performance problems, or avoid sanctions.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's important there to point out it's a two-part analysis. And when this was first highlighted through legislation and ultimately ends up in the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, as Jack's pointing out, kind of the difference between the two, the Congress and FMCSA saw fit to break this out into a two-part analysis, and I think this is where things go wrong. So the first part of the analysis, as you could tell from Jack's discussion there, is there has to be a finding of an affiliation or that this carrier previously existed, depending on whether we're looking at reincarnation or chameleon carriers. But that affiliation alone is not sufficient in and of itself to then, that's not unlawful. It's not unlawful to have affiliations with other motor carriers. And so I thought what would be helpful is to actually pull up the regulations here, because I don't think many folks have actually looked at this. But the regulations, if you're interested in looking these up, are 49 CFR 386.73. That's where you'll find the standard that the FMCSA has to meet in order to pursue enforcement against these so-called reincarnated carriers. And you'll see when you read the regulation that the FMCSA has two options available to it in handling reincarnated carriers. It can either issue an out-of-service order, shut them down entirely, or a record consolidation order, which is essentially if it's one carrier that gets shut down and then reincarnates as a different carrier, or the affiliated situation where you got two related carriers being used to continue an operation that gets shut down, they can consolidate the record. So if the first one gets shut down, then the out-of-service order that was issued to the first one can be ported over into the second one, consolidated with the second one. But my point in bringing this up here is that you could read the regulation here. It says for the out-of-service order option, if FMCSA may issue an out-of-service order to prohibit a motor carrier from conducting operations subject to its jurisdiction upon a determination that by the FMCSA that the motor carrier operated or attempted to operate a motor carrier under a new entity or as an affiliated entity. So that's the first part. You have to find an affiliation. And then the second part is the more crucial one, and this is the one that I think a lot of folks miss, which is that that affiliation has to be being used for an improper purpose. And what is an improper purpose? They are listed out in the regulation. They're clearly defined. An improper purpose would be to avoid complying with an FMCSA order. These are generally going to be out-of-service orders. Avoid complying with a statutory or regulatory requirement. Avoid paying a civil penalty. Avoid responding to an enforcement action, or avoid being linked to a negative compliance history. So two parts. You find affiliation, number one, and then that in and of itself is not unlawful. Step two is you have to find that the affiliation is being used for an improper purpose on this list. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. Rob, Jack, anything there that you would highlight beyond that?
No, I think for me, it's always just boiled down to, I mean, not just, but one of the big pieces of it's identity. It's, are you who you say you are, and are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And I mean, I know that sounds kind of basic, but really that's kind of what it boils down to.
Brandon, I have a case right now I'm looking at, and I got one motor carrier registered with FMCSA, had operating authority, one driver, one vehicle. It opened up in early 2025. They were shut down, no insurance in September of 25. And then they were issued a out-of-service order for no new entrant safety audit in January of 06. One carrier, one driver, 5 months operation, 1,047 inspections roadside. And I'm looking further, and so I do see affiliated carriers from the same address, and obviously they're avoiding a lot of things, obviously. So, but the system is definitely broke. So, but I mean, one driver, one carrier. I'm seeing multiple inspections daily from this carrier, but all over the country. And I have that carrier mapped out with all the inspections.
Yeah, so I want to dig into that in a little bit. Before we get there, though, I'd want to kind of get a backdrop on the Chameleon carrier issue. This hasn't been, I'm sure it's been an issue for a long time, but it's really only been baked into the regulations for, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so. Do you recall when the agency first started tackling this issue and what kind of sparked the debate?
Yeah, I do actually. Back in 2008,
That's correct.
there was a bus crash, I believe in Texas, Angel Tours. 17, 18 people were killed, and it was operating under, it was Angel Tours, and then it switched, it had its name. The new carrier was Iguala Tours or something. And it caused a lot of media frenzy on that. And I remember the administrator at the time, John Hill, he brought me in the meeting and says, "This is what we call a chameleon carrier." He goes, "Remember that term because you're going to hear it for the rest of your career." And that was 2008.
Yeah.
And then we had a crash, I believe, on 95, and it was the motor coach companies up in New York. And they were switching drivers, switching vehicles, intermingling hours of service and so forth like that. And then we found it hard, Brandon, to actually consolidate those records. And as you said, at some point, I'm going to take a guess without looking around, probably had to be about 2000, maybe 15 or 16, we got the authority to consolidate and put these carriers out of business. So
Yeah, Rob, I know you just recently on another Freight Waves article kind of broke down this whole problem with chameleon carriers and kind of the background and how it came to be. Any other insights on how we got to where we're at now?
Well, I had written an article, and the reason as soon as he said where, he was going to the 2008 crash, I kind of knew exactly where we were going with it. But there's been a number of these major crashes throughout the years. It's not just, it comes up, everybody gets enraged about it. Something might happen, but it's usually something small. And then everybody forgets about it until you have the next one. And with this one, it was kind of, it's a huge network and it gets bigger every day that I dig into it. But we probably had more kickback on this article than any of the others. We've had a number of people reach out to FreightWaves and say, "Hey, we're just this one we just have one truck in the same building." And it's like, you have shared VINs, you have shared plates. Can you explain any of the following things? And then they never respond. It's like they don't think you have the ability to research into these very micro elements to just say, it's not just about the building that you're in, it's about all the other things that you have shared in common. So it can get pretty deep, but that's been one of the big pieces that I've tried to push in terms of classifying them as chameleon carriers. It's not always about being at the same address.
Yeah, like we said, I mean, regulation's clear. I mean, that's only one part of the two-part analysis. So just sharing addresses, even though it sounds sketchy, and probably is sketchy in most cases, without an intent or just an intent, but actually using that affiliation to achieve one of the improper purposes that is specifically listed in the regulation, is just not a chameleon carrier under the regulations. I mean, maybe we call it that colloquially, but under the regulations, it's not a chameleon carrier until that has been used for an improper purpose. The reason I keep harping on that is because back in a different life, when I was dealing with these issues more directly in my capacity as an attorney and looking at these cases actually get litigated out in the administrative appeals process. First of all, we were dealing with a lot fewer of these. Over the first 15 years of my career, I could probably count on one hand the number of times I dealt with a chameleon carrier case. And I've heard more about it in the last 3 weeks than I did probably in the first 15 years. But regardless, in those circumstances where we were actually prosecuting the case or defending the case before the FMCSA, and Jack can attest to this, it's a thorough case that the FMCSA has to build in order to prosecute these cases. They can't just do it willy-nilly. They have to first build a case of affiliation through the things you're talking about, Rob. They have to link up all of these different operations that they want to consolidate through things like addresses for sure, ownership, common ownership, bank account information, phone numbers, all of that. And it has to be, a look at the full universe of evidence, not just one thing here or there. But then the harder part for them is to show that the affiliation was used for that improper purpose. And when I was dealing with this, the handful of cases that I remember, the improper purpose that always came up in the cases I was involved with were just avoiding a unsat rating. I mean, I never saw it come up in any other context other than one carrier gets shut down due to an unsat rating and then reincarnates or tries to move equipment over to an affiliated entity to avoid that unsat rating. That was the quintessential improper purpose that led to the prosecution of those cases. Jack, any other insight on how you actually saw these play out when you were kind of litigating them through the administrative appeals process or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, even before we had the regulation, it was very difficult to prove. But I also saw it, Brandon, you mentioned, I saw it in a couple cases where, just like you said, it was a conditional rating. If you get that conditional rating, you lose your contract. So they switched over to another DOT number and authority they had in the bank. So,
well, I think one of the things that I've harped on is, and I've discussed this on other shows that I've been on this week and last week, but when I was in the private equity side, there was a lot of times we would have mergers and acquisitions. So there's times where you may legally share the same address, phone number, officer, everything.
This is how most large carriers are set up. So it's not like it's a foreign thing to see affiliated carriers that are sharing drivers, that are sharing equipment, that are sharing addresses, that are sharing ownership. It is a exceedingly common structure in our industry, albeit for the larger motor carriers. I'll give it to you that when you start to see that type of affiliation with smaller carriers, it starts to raise an eyebrow. Is this really being done appropriately with intercompany agreements, that type of stuff? Probably not.
Yeah, and that was us. We had 20 all together. I think it ended up being 20 before we started merging some of them together. But they were all based at the same office in Richmond. They all had my name on them. They all had my phone number and my email on them. So to look at it from a position without context, Rob is a owner of a Chameleon carrier network with 20 DOTs in it, and he should go to jail. But once you add the context of this is done totally legally, we're not trying, it's full disclosure. The FMCSA knows what we're doing. They understand how we've done it. And then when we do happen to share vehicles across entities, it's usually under basically a lease agreement. So everything is on the up and up. It's full disclosure. There's nothing that we're trying to do that's nefarious or hidden or underboard. So I think that's got a lot to do with it in terms of the context piece, because it can be done legally and it's fine. It's just how you go about it.
Yeah, I'm curious how you guys are seeing, and Rob, I know you've really dug into this recently, Jack, to get back to your earlier point about some of the dots you're starting to connect for that one case. I'm curious, number one, why it seems like we're starting to see this become a bigger issue within just the last few months. And then also, how are you seeing these Chameleon carriers, if that's what they are, using the Chameleon structure to, what gaps are they trying to exploit through that structure?
Well, what I see, Brandon, and in several instances, I mean, what brought it to light, I think it's Secretary Duffy and some high-profile crashes, and then some articles written by a famous author named Rob Carpenter. And I mean that. I mean, I think Rob's brought a lot of attention to this right now. And I just think that they're high profile. It's getting the public's attention, and DOT, and there's a lot more people on the bandwagon too, looking at this. I mean, you look at Dale Prack's Freight Validate. I mean, he's all over on this subject. So it's getting a lot more media attention as well. And DOT's exactly, they've acknowledged it. They're changing the registration system. How much that will help, I don't know. But the current registration system is broke. It's only identifying, it's supposed to identify carriers who are applying to get the DOT number, not their authority. And I don't know if the new motor system is going to try to resolve some of those issues with the authority or not. So,
Yeah, I know you've
Well,
written about that too, Rob. Explain to folks kind of the background with the registration system, the Archie system, and from what we could tell, what they're planning to do on that in the future.
well, they did update the registration system to Modus, but one of the things that the other system, which is Archie, which nobody seems to know about, but I pulled this memo. We had a memo mid last year that said, "Hey, we are." I don't know who dropped it. It was somebody from the FMCSA. It wasn't an administrator. It was just a guy that does the techie stuff. So this goes out and he says, "Hey, we want to develop this system that does all of the following things to detect chameleon carrier abnormalities in the registration process." And I read it and I was like, well, we already have this. Like, I just did an article on this like 5 months ago and we just don't have much data on it. So back in 2013, Archie was developed under congressional mandate. They paid like $4 million for it. It was supposed to do all of these things that this new memo said was going to happen. Well, we had data showing that it existed at some point because we had data that showed that all of these new carriers had been screened through this process, and a number of them have been detected as chameleon carriers. And then we haven't heard anything about it since. So I think that piece, I think I'd like to know more information on, but we don't have that information. So one of the things that I did do recently in my coding ventures was I used the same methodology. I just pulled the methodology that they built Archie off of and then created a code to basically reinvent that system on my own. And that's how a lot of the data that I pulled has come from. So, I mean, I found that it works. It's just, do we have it? I don't know.
And these systems are just kind of pinpointing commonality among existing registrants or past registrants and new registrants looking for common ownership, the current Archie system. What do you know what data points it's actually looking at?
Yeah, in the methodology, it looks at pretty much everything. It looks for commonality amongst ownership, VIN transfers, license transfers, even churn rates. It looks at like from a reincarnated aspect. Maybe you've been revoked or put out of service, and have you then tried to restart as another carrier? So it was supposed to evaluate this. There's a long list of these things, but and I think if it was in place, it makes logical sense based on the methodology. But one of the things that I liked about last year, and I think this was a big move forward, is a lot of the freight fraud that we have is Serbian and Moldovan and Armenian, and tied to that is often chameleon carrier operations. But one of those pieces is, are you who you say you are? And there's a lot of people that'll license a trucking company as no name given, or Mickey Mouse, or the FMCSA, or whatever they decide to put in there. There was no validation piece. Are you who you say you are, and are you in this country? And a lot of these people are running these businesses from other countries, so there's limited accountability when they're discovered. But when IDEMIA came up last year, and then you had something where you had to have a real U.S. government ID, and it involved facial recognition that compared you to your license.
In order to register for a DOT number?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that was a big piece. And then if you let that lapse to get your authority, not for DOT number, for authority, if you let that lapse, you've got to obviously pay the $300 again and go back through the verification process. So I think that piece, just that being able to identify who we're dealing with and that we know who you are, is one thing. So I think that was a good step.
Yeah,
Brandon, just to go on, Rob said, he talked about the registration system and the $300. If you look under the URS rule, and if you look under the authority for the URS rule, Safety Lou and Map 21, FMCSA can raise that registration fee to any dollar they want to help pay for the entire registration system. And I went as far as saying that the new entrant process is part of the registration system. And I've recommended several times, and I know I get a lot of pushback, raise that registration fee to $5,000 for the operating authority. And I don't know if it'll deter some of these. It will deter some, but some of these people that are buying up DOT numbers and operating authorities, they're an organized crime element, and I don't know if the 5,000 would even bother them at all. So,
well, it depends on the fallout from it, right? Like you can look at broker bonds when it went from 10 to 75,000, and the idea was if we go to 75, that'll push out all these small, like less legitimate actors in the broker market. Well, then we had companies like Pacific Financial and other surety bond brokers that would come in and say, well, for $1,000 a year, we'll finance that $75,000 bond. So you can basically be a broker for $1,300 and have instant access to unlimited freight on the market, right? Which I think has been a huge driver of cargo theft. But it's no real different than being a carrier, than getting a carrier authority. You go rent a Penske for $700 a week, pay $300 for your authority, you have unlimited access to freight 21 days later. So I think as long as you had a way to keep people from subverting that $5,000 piece, I think it would be, I think increasing it would be a good thing, whether 5,000 is a number or it's something different. Whether maybe it's a scaling number. I don't know. Maybe if you're going to enter the market with 100 trucks, it's something X versus if you're just one guy with a truck, it stays at 1,000, 5,000, whatever.
So I think what you guys are both pulling on, it seems like there's probably a confluence of several different issues that are converging over the last couple of years. At least that's what it seems to be. So, because we're not only talking about chameleon carriers now, we're also just talking about barriers to entry more generally and keeping bad actors out of the industry altogether. We're also talking about insurance and its involvement in the equation and the cost of insurance, and also wrapped up into this now, just more recently, things like English language proficiency, non-domiciled CDLs. I mean, I just put up on the screen a second ago Secretary Duffy's response to the Indiana accident that Jack was mentioning. And in that one tweet, he talks about not only English language proficiency, but also chameleon carriers as if they are, linked together somehow. But obviously they don't necessarily have to be linked together. But it's just like all of these things are either becoming a bigger problem, or they're just all being broadcast more broadly through things like social media, and they seem to be becoming a bigger issue.
Well, I think that's it. Like, I mean, we've talked about chameleon carriers, Brandon, for 5 or 6 years, right? Or longer. And I think people start to say, well, we just got to talking about it. Well, no, we didn't start talking about it in 2025 or 2024. I mean, this has been an ongoing discussion in the industry for a long time. But obviously, with the growth of technology, social media, everybody has a platform. And then you have people who, as technology evolves, and your newer generations who are tech proficient, and they can just vibe code a website to create something that tells you all of these things are connected. I mean, that in itself drives, huge awareness of the topic. But I still think the barrier to entry piece is a huge part. And insurance, that's one of the reasons I wrote the article on the insurance piece, because, when I started as a carrier, one of the hardest things to get myself into business was finding someone to insure me and to be able to come up with the money for the down payment to get insurance. It wasn't the $300 that was not prohibitive. It wasn't anything else. It wasn't getting the truck. The one thing that could have kept me out of the market was whether someone outpriced me in the market for coverage, or if someone wouldn't cover me at all. So when we started getting to this point where we're not even willing to look at the carrier outside of what they're self-attesting to say, okay, you have a truck, you are a driver, we're going to give you instant issue insurance. That's an issue. You're removing one of the biggest barriers, most costly barriers to entry into the market. So if you just made everybody have an underwritten policy, or you increase the cost of coverage or the minimum of coverage, it's going to have an effect on who can enter the industry. And you look at back when ICC was here instead of FMCSA, we had far fewer carriers, but everybody knew everybody else, and it was up to them to let you into the trucker group. And now it's like it doesn't matter. You want a truck, you got a truck, welcome to the industry. You're a trucker. So barriers to entry is a huge part of it.
Rob, I know I'm not supposed to be asking the questions, but you just with the insurance industry, do they talk to each other? Do they have a common database? Because what we see in a lot of these chameleon carriers is same vehicles, same drivers. An insurance company looks at vehicles and drivers. And I didn't know if, they talk to each other and go, hey, this is odd. The company we just insured or that company down the road just insured the same drivers and same vehicles. So what's going on?
Yeah, there's certainly informational systems out there that they can look and see different things like that. But one of the things that you have to think about too is, and we've kind of figured this out over time where, and I'm about to put another article out about this. So, and I don't know how many people it's going to make mad. I made some mad last week, but we might as well keep the ball rolling. But with a lot of these chameleon carriers or less compliant carriers, what they'll do is they'll come in and they'll say, all right, it's a once a year, name the volume of your fleet. And say we have, let's just use, it's Chubb. One of the ones that's doing it's Chubb, and they're going to end this process because what's happening is people will come in, they'll declare we have 20 trucks. These are the 20 VINs that we have. And then next year when they come to renew, they've somehow come up with 400 more trucks somewhere throughout that year, but the price of coverage never changed because only one time a year were they required to update the VIN. So for that whole year, they were only paying for 20 trucks of insurance when they actually were running 400 trucks. Nobody knew. So part of that is just having lack of like a clearinghouse. And we have this issue in a lot of ways. It's like, do we have a clearinghouse of like bad actors in the industry or bad VINs that we know have been swapped? And I think it would be worth looking at for sure to kind of add in some kind of clearinghouse of, bad equipment or bad people or however we could do it.
So kind of going back to an issue I raised, but I don't think we ever got to talking about earlier, was kind of how you're seeing it evolve, the chameleon, the complexity of these chameleon operations evolve. Like I said, when I was dealing with these more directly, probably 5-10 years ago, we were seeing them mostly used to just avoid an out of service order or a conditional rating, as Jack said. How are these complex fraudulent networks being used nowadays? It's not just to avoid safety ratings. Obviously, we don't have very many carriers in the country that even have a safety rating. So, Rob, Jack, how are you seeing these networks using their affiliations and stuff like that to avoid regulatory oversight?
They're selling the MC number and the DOT number. And that's what I see in this one case I have, 1,047, and I'm looking at shippers and everything like that, but they're selling that $300. They're, telling their people that are in this organized network, hey, don't bother getting the registrations on, you don't really need it. You can use mine, just give me the $300 and, we'll call it even. And they're selling it. They're making money on these. I looked at these 1,047 inspections and all of them with the same DOT number. There's no doubt. I mean, they are selling. So that's how they're making profits that way as well. And then you get into the fraud issue, cargo theft and so forth like that. I mean, they're not who they say they are. So
yeah, and one thing one of the things that I've kind of watched unfold is to talk more about what Jack's saying. There's a woman online named Maria. A lot of this is done in like Discord groups and Telegram and Signal chats. And I'll join a lot of these groups because I am a truck driver. I'm probably already in most of the truck driving groups out there. But you'll find these leads to different places and you go to these sites. And Maria used to sell these things MCs. You go in there, she tells you everything you need to know. She sold 300 of these things last year. It's a marketplace for DOT and MC businesses. Go on there, she'll sell it for you. But Maria got so busy doing this on Telegram that she started a site called Domalia. Like vibe coded this herself, started it. It's out there. They're not even trying to hide it. So that's part of it. But the other thing that I see sometimes, you go to carriers who, and a lot of times they operate under the premise of I'll remain completely uncompliant. I have no interest in doing anything I'm supposed to do. And by the time new entrant comes around between 12 and 18 months, I'm going to have burnt all the compliance bridges that I have with enforcement. Time to close that one down and move to this other one that I've got sitting in the wind. I've already got a DOT that's dead on it. I pay the $300 and upgrade it to an authority, move all my equipment over, and now the business that probably would have been shut down can now kind of basically reincarnate itself. So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it.
So putting aside kind of avoiding the enforcement part of it, it sounds like, and I think this is true, and it's probably the impetus for a lot of those MC sales. It sounds like it's mostly to get access to business that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise had they just started up shop from the very beginning. I know there are several shippers out there, we won't name them, but shippers and brokers out there that won't do business with newly registered entities or entities that just have gotten their MC number within the last year or so. So is that what's driving a lot of this from your perspective, is trying to get access to business that requires that these entities have been around and have experience operating over a certain amount of time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you look at the Telegram groups when they're selling these things, I mean, the listing is just like a classified ad. I mean, it's like 2 inch by 1 inch. And then what ends up happening is,
I like that dramatic zoom into your face.
Oh, my AI didn't run me down. But so what happens is you have like this classified ad and it basically breaks down everything. But one of the things that's almost in every single one of them is other retailers will work with you because they have agreements with these people already. So, and some of these are really bad. They're really bad authorities. And she spells it out like, hey, this is not a good authority. It's got two basics in alert status, but we'll sell it to you for 10 grand. And it's like, okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's the important point though. It's that, these Chameleon networks are not always used for a per se unlawful purpose. It's not unlawful for them to it's not unlawful. It's not a violation of the safety regs, I should say, for them to use that affiliation or that purchasing of the MCs to go and solicit business from a shipper or a broker. It probably breaches the contract that they ultimately enter into with that retailer, but it's not unlawful per se. And so I think that just adds to the complexity of this issue. We've got carriers that are using these affiliations for a truly unlawful purpose to avoid a negative safety compliance history. That FMCSA rightfully has to start with those, right? I mean, that's what its regulations allow it to target. But then you've got this whole other group, probably a bigger group of folks and carriers using affiliations just to get other business. And so it's almost like we've got those two separate issues that both need tackling, but when it comes to FMCSA, it's already short-staffed. I mean, it obviously has to focus on the first group.
Yeah, I think there's got to be some priority, but there's other ways that you can track these things down too, because you can sell some things, but some things you can't sell. You can sell an authority, but you can't sell a DOT number. So one of the ways that I've kind of tracked these things is to kind of watch the sales of these entities. Is you can look at an aged, one number is aged, one number is new, and they don't match it. Obviously there's disparity there. And when that happens, there has to be a reason, right? Why do you have an old number, an old DOT number, but not an old C number? So there's a lot of different tails in this thing, and maybe Archie's the answer to that. You bleed all these into the same methodology and put it back out and use it. But you got two different problems. And when I was up in DC and I was talking to Bars about this, Administrator Bars said, we've got buckets that we're looking at, and you've got buckets that are, hey, we've got problems in our industry that are long-term problems that we need to solve, but we also have to keep problems from entering the industry as well. And then there's critical buckets versus things that we would like to get done that have to be focused on, because ultimately you only have 3 more years of this administration before you possibly end up having to change.
It'll be interesting. Breaking news here. We've got Administrator Barr is scheduled to be on our Trucksafe Live podcast in a couple of weeks. So for sure, it'll be interesting to hear his take on kind of the prioritization issue, what issues are top of mind for the agency in tackling, and where this chameleon carrier issue kind of fits into the mix. Running out of time here, Jack, Rob, if you all, I know we've kind of hit on it here and there as we've gone along, but if you all were in the middle of crafting legislation or regulations to try and get control of this issues, what major things would you want to see baked into those to give you the tools, if you're the FMCSA, the tools to really get a hold of the problem?
Well, I'll just start out twofold. And it's, make the entry a little bit difficult. Brandon, you touched on in the beginning, the pre-authority exam testing and the new entrant safety audit. I'd make them, first I'd start that pre-exam. It's way overdue, but I'd make the new entrant a requirement before you actually get the authority. And then make it in person, and make it a little bit more difficult. And then the second thing is, when I was at FMCSA, we were going to, and we were doing this when I left, they were trying to designate what we call senior safety investigators, those that have a lot more experience to investigate the tougher cases. And these chameleon cases would be the tougher cases. And I guess that never came through. It fell through the cracks after I left. And, FMCSA has some good talent that could, you could start looking at the principal place of businesses and where they match up, where there's 50 people in one place, just branch out and see what type of activities stolen from them. So I would, with the resources they have, the limited, I would try to focus a little bit more on chameleon carriers and see where we go from there.
Rob?
I'm not much different. I'm thinking the barriers to entry is the big piece. And then, if you can focus on, keeping people out and you're not constantly putting trash in, then you can clean up the trash that's already in the system. And I think it has to start with the spigot, right? Like, we have to cut off bad people from getting in the system, or we're never going to get the system cleaned up. Yeah. So I think all of those are big things, and being screening carriers and actually seeing who they are and knowing who they really are when they get into the system is going to be a good thing.
Yeah. Maybe they can hire you to vibe code them some kind of software solution that'll take care of this.
I've been getting in trouble with that, but yeah, I think that's really the answer to a lot of it. Is I think if you can limit who gets into this thing, who gets in the club, right? Like, there's barriers to everything.
And they shouldn't have to identify what systems they're using, the technical specifications for something like that. I know they do it because of the rulemaking and the privacy issues, but there's got to be some exception to that. I mean, you're putting out all this information there, and the bad people are looking at it and go, okay, how do we go around that information? So
yeah, and that's another thing, like you mentioned Dale Prax earlier, and Dale Prax, they started a freight fraud task force, and with that freight fraud task force, they don't put anything out. Like, they've made it a point that we don't want to put out anything that we do to actually solve what we solve and fix what we fix.
Yep.
For that reason.
Tyler from our team is pointing out something on LinkedIn that's worth mentioning. He says, should FMCSA have the authority to approve change in control of entities with operating authority? Arguably, FMCSA doesn't have that authority now, but Congress could provide that authority, could cut down on buying and selling of entities with DOT numbers. I think that kind of goes right into it, which is, what authority does FMCSA have here? He's pointing out kind of a gap that we've seen exploited over the years, which is that, like he says, arguably FMCSA doesn't have the authority to require that they approve changes in control for motor carrier authority. So we could just, that's what facilitates the sale of these MC numbers, is that they don't have to get the sign off from FMCSA to change the owner of this MC number from one person to the other in the context of that sale. So yeah,
I think that's a good idea, but I think the problem is that you have to think about too is a lot of times on the black market for selling these businesses is you have proxy ownership, right? So when these are sold, it'll clearly say in the advertisement, this company is being sold with an owner, with an active bank account, and all you have to do is buy it. And
Yeah.
you become the owner because you bought it, but on paper, the ownership that has always been the ownership remains the ownership. So there really isn't a public display of who the actual owner really is. And we've seen this in other instances where people will set up 5 or 6 companies. They'll be the owner. No one knows who they are. And then there's 5 individual owners that are proxy owners that don't even know they own trucking companies.
Yeah.
So that's an issue in itself.
Yeah.
And I also I use that imminent hazard authority a lot more. And even before you go through the records consolidation, I mean, look at the crash in Indiana. Just use that authority.
Yeah, we don't see FMCSA use that all that often. Again, another issue that I could count on one hand how many times I saw it over the last 15 years used or so. But yeah, I mean, technically FMCSA has the authority to immediately shut down a motor carrier or a driver for that matter if they think they are in imminent hazard to public safety. The regulations define what is imminent hazard. As you would imagine, there are legal concerns with doing that, obviously, because you are taking away something that you granted to somebody, namely operating authority, without first giving them a hearing to dispute any evidence that you may have. So that's the concern. But you're right, Jack. We don't see it used that often, and it probably could be used more frequently than it is. And I think even if FMCSA gets called to task on those on the back end in some kind of litigation or something that spurs up after that, I think they would be able to defend themselves with a lot of these cases that we're seeing. So,
well, worst case, if you put out an imminent hazard order and you take someone off the road, they're off the road. Even if it ends up going to court and you've got to battle it out, you have them off the road for a period of time, and in that time, you can use that time to figure out everything else that you need to figure out to actually back up, even more so, why you did what you did.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're about out of time. Anything else that we haven't hit on that we should?
I don't think so. I'm sure there is, but
yeah, another topic we could just talk for days on. Anyway, Jack, as always, we appreciate you joining us and hearing your insight on it. Like I said, Jack's going to join us at this year's boot camp. I'm excited about that.
I am too, Brandon.
It'll be great. We've got a lot in store, like I said. So if anybody wants to come meet Jack in person, that'd be a good place to do it. Otherwise, you can shoot him an email, or if you need to get in contact with him, you could always reach out to us and we can put you in contact. So, Jack, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. All right, that's going to wrap up this show. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Be sure to follow us on our social media pages for updates on upcoming shows and articles and videos on all kinds of DOT compliance topics. Also, subscribe to our newsletter if you need a resource for that type of stuff. Trucksafe.com/subscribe is where you can do that. Anything else, Rob?
I don't think so.
All right. That's it. We'll sign off here. Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Thanks.